The council chamber floated in orbit around a distant world, a place where different alien species came to discuss matters of war and peace. Commander Jake Harper stood in the center of the massive room, feeling small among the towering creatures that surrounded him. He was human, and humans were still considered young and weak by most of the galaxy. The walls of the chamber glowed with soft blue light, and holographic displays showed star maps and data streams. Jake kept his face calm, but inside he felt a growing sense of danger. The Zorvathi representative stepped forward, its massive reptilian body casting a shadow over Jake. High Commander Zalthun was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark scales that looked like armor. Its yellow eyes stared down at the human with something that looked like amusement. Behind Zalthun stood several other Zorvathi warriors, all armed and dangerous. The Zorvathi Empire had conquered 47 star systems over 300 years. They had never lost a war. They were known throughout the galaxy as unstoppable. Zalthun raised one clawed hand and a holographic document appeared in the air between them. The terms were written in multiple languages, including English. Jake read them slowly, feeling his jaw tighten with each line. The Zorvathi were demanding total surrender. Earth would have to give up its government, destroy all military ships, and accept Zorvathi rule. Humans would become subjects of the Empire, with no rights and no freedom. They had 30 days to accept, or the Zorvathi would come and take Earth by force. Jake looked around the council chamber at the other alien species present. None of them spoke up. None of them protested. He could see it in their faces and body language. They had all heard these demands before. Some of their own worlds had fallen to the Zorvathi. Others had simply chosen to stay quiet rather than risk becoming the next target. The galaxy had learned to fear the Zorvathi Empire. Jake took a deep breath and looked directly at Zalthun. His voice was steady when he spoke. He said that Earth rejected the ultimatum completely. Humans would not surrender their freedom. They would not bow to any empire. If the Zorvathi wanted Earth, they would have to fight for every inch of it. The chamber fell completely silent. Then Zalthun began to laugh, a deep rumbling sound that echoed off the walls. The other Zorvathi joined in, and even some of the alien council members looked away in embarrassment for the human commander. Zalthun stopped laughing and leaned close to Jake. The alien's breath smelled like sulfur and metal. Zalthun said that humanity had existed in space for barely 200 years. Earth had a small fleet, maybe a few hundred ships total. The Zorvathi Third Fleet alone had 800 warships, including 12 massive dreadnoughts that could destroy continents. This was not going to be a war. It was going to be an extermination. The Zorvathi would arrive at Earth in 40 days, and they would show the galaxy what happened to species that refused to submit. Jake did not flinch. He simply nodded, turned, and walked out of the chamber. His ship was waiting in the docking bay, a small diplomatic vessel that looked like a toy compared to the massive Zorvathi warships nearby. As Jake's ship left the station and jumped to faster-than-light travel, he allowed himself to show emotion. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. He knew what was coming. He knew how badly humanity was outnumbered, but he also knew that giving up without a fight was not an option. Back on Earth, President Linda Morrison received Jake's report in her office deep beneath the government complex. She listened to the recording of the meeting twice, her face growing more serious with each replay. Around her sat the most important leaders in human space. General Marcus Cole commanded the Earth Defense Force. Katie Sullivan ran the Luna shipyards where most human ships were built. Dr. Vincent Hayes led the research station on. Mars Commander Drake Bennett controlled the Special Operations Forces that handled the most dangerous missions. President Morrison stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the city stretching for miles, full of people going about their daily lives. They did not know yet that war was coming. They did not know that an alien empire wanted to enslave or destroy them all. She had to tell them soon, but first she needed to know if Earth even had a chance of survival. General Cole brought up a holographic display showing the current state of Earth's military forces. The numbers were not good. Earth had 350 operational warships of various sizes. Most were small patrol craft or medium cruisers. Earth had only 5 ships large enough to be called dreadnoughts, and even those were smaller and less powerful than the Zorvathi versions. Humanity's total military strength was less than half of just the Zorvathi Third Fleet, and intelligence reports suggested the Zorvathi had at least 6 full fleets in total. but Katie Sullivan spoke up with some hope in her voice. Her engineering teams at Luna's shipyards had been working on new weapon systems. They had developed railguns that could fire projectiles at incredible speeds, fast enough to punch through most known shield types. The problem was that these weapons required a lot of power, more than most ships could generate. They had only been able to install them on the newer cruisers and the 5 dreadnoughts. Dr. Hayes added that his team on Mars had made a breakthrough in shield technology. They had discovered a way to create quantum shields that could absorb and redirect energy weapon fire. The shields were much more effective than the old models, but they had limitations. The power requirements were so high that only smaller, faster ships could use them effectively. Large ships did not have the reactor capacity to maintain the shields for long periods. Commander Bennett had been training special forces teams in new tactics. Instead of fighting the traditional way, with large fleets facing each other in open space, he wanted to use guerrilla warfare. Hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, making the enemy pay for every mile they advanced. It was not a strategy designed to win battles, but rather to make the war so costly that the enemy would decide it was not worth continuing. President Morrison listened to all of them and made her decision. She would not surrender Earth without a fight. She would mobilize every resource humanity had. Every shipyard would work around the clock building new vessels and weapons. Every scientist would focus on developing better defenses. Every soldier would train for the coming battle. And she would tell the people of Earth the truth, that they faced an enemy that wanted to destroy them, but that humanity had survived worse before. That evening, President Morrison made a broadcast that was heard on Earth and every human colony throughout the solar system. She stood before the cameras and explained the situation clearly. An alien empire called the Zorvathi had demanded Earth's surrender. Earth had refused. In 40 days, the Zorvathi would attack with overwhelming force. The chances of victory were small. Many people would die, but humanity had a choice: fight for freedom or accept slavery. She knew what choice humans would make because throughout history, whenever humanity faced extinction, they had always found a way to survive. The reaction across Earth and the colonies was immediate. Fear, yes, but also anger and determination. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Engineers and scientists offered their services. Even civilians began organizing evacuation plans and emergency response teams. Humanity had been given 40 days to prepare for the fight of their existence, and they would use every second of that time. Commander Jake Harper returned to Earth and was immediately assigned to coordinate the defense planning. He worked with General Cole and the other commanders to develop strategies that might give Earth a chance. They could not match the Zorvathi in raw power, so they had to be smarter. They had to use every advantage, no matter how small. They had to make the Zorvathi bleed for every victory. The countdown began, and with each passing day, Earth transformed into a fortress ready for war. The Luna shipyards became a place of constant noise and activity. Captain Nicole Price walked through the massive construction bays where crews worked without stopping. Sparks flew from welding torches as workers installed new weapons on old ships. The quantum shield generators that Dr. Hayes had designed were being fitted onto every fast attack craft they could spare. Nicole had been given command of the orbital defense platforms that circled Earth, 12 massive stations that could fire enough weapons to destroy a small fleet. But she knew that against 800 Zorvathi warships, even these powerful stations might not be enough. Nicole stopped to watch as a crew installed a new railgun on Platform 7. The weapon was enormous, nearly 50 meters long, and it could fire a solid projectile at speeds that would punch through almost any armor. The problem was cooling. Each shot generated so much heat that the gun needed several minutes to cool down before it could fire again. The engineers were working on a solution, but time was running out. They had less than 30 days left before the Zorvathi arrived. Far out in the asteroid belt, Commander Alex Turner was leading a very different kind of operation. His small flotilla of 20 ships moved quietly through the massive field of rocks and ice. They were planting automated defense satellites in strategic locations, places where the Zorvathi fleet would likely pass on their way to Earth. These satellites were designed to activate only when enemy ships came close, staying dormant and invisible until the right moment. Alex also supervised the placement of thousands of mines, each one equipped with its own small thruster to adjust position and intercept passing vessels. Alex knew this would not stop the Zorvathi fleet, but that was not the goal. The goal was to make them nervous, to make them slow down and check every shadow, to make them waste time and resources on defense instead of focusing purely on attack. Every hour the Zorvathi spent dealing with mines and ambushes was another hour for Earth to prepare. Alex's second-in-command, Lieutenant Sam Cooper, worried that they were spreading their resources too thin, but Alex disagreed. The asteroid belt was enormous, and the Zorvathi could not possibly search all of it. They would have to choose between speed and safety. Back on Earth, a young tactical officer named Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was presenting her ideas to General Cole and his staff. Amy was only 26 years old, but she had studied every major battle in human history and every alien conflict that Earth's intelligence services knew about. She had noticed something important about the Zorvathi. They always fought the same way, with overwhelming force arranged in perfect formations. Their dreadnoughts stayed in the center, protected by layers of smaller ships. They advanced slowly and methodically, crushing any resistance with superior firepower. Amy's plan was to refuse to fight that kind of battle. Instead of meeting the Zorvathi head-on where their numbers would matter most, she proposed constant harassment. Small groups of fast ships would strike at the edges of the Zorvathi formation, then retreat before the enemy could respond with full force. Larger human ships would stay hidden, moving between asteroids and moons, only engaging when they had a clear advantage. The Zorvathi would be forced to either split their fleet to chase human ships, making them vulnerable, or stay together and allow humanity to control the pace of battle. General Cole listened carefully and then approved the plan. Amy was promoted on the spot and given command of a squadron of fast attack craft. These ships were small, each carrying only 12 crew members, but they were equipped with the new quantum shields and armed with powerful torpedoes. Amy's squadron would be one of several that would harass the Zorvathi during their approach to Earth. It was dangerous work, and casualties would be high, but someone had to slow the enemy down. On Mars, Dr. Vincent Hayes barely slept anymore. His research team worked around the clock testing and improving the quantum shield technology. They had discovered that the shields worked by creating a field that existed partially outside normal space. When energy weapons hit the shield, the energy was redirected into another dimension where it dispersed harmlessly. The shields were revolutionary, but they had serious limitations. They consumed enormous amounts of power, and they could not protect against physical projectiles, only energy weapons. Hayes and his team were trying to solve both problems, but time was their enemy. Hayes also worried about something else. The quantum shields generated a very specific energy signature when active. If the Zorvathi could detect and track that signature, they could target the ships using the shields first, eliminating humanity's best defensive advantage. He ordered his team to develop a way to mask the signature, but so far they had not succeeded. It was a risk they would have to accept. The 40th day arrived with a tension that could be felt across the entire solar system. Long-range sensors at the edge of human space near Neptune's orbit suddenly registered massive energy readings. The Zorvathi Third Fleet had arrived. 800 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a display of perfect coordination. Their formation was enormous, stretching across thousands of kilometers of space. At the center were the 12 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small city and bristling with enough weapons to level a planet. High Commander Zalthun sat on the bridge of his flagship, a dreadnought named Dark Conquest. He felt satisfaction as he looked at the tactical displays showing his fleet's perfect formation. This was going to be easy. The humans had refused to surrender, but they would soon learn the price of defiance. Zalthun opened a communication channel to Earth, sending a message that was received in every human colony and on every military vessel. His voice was cold and mocking when he spoke. He said that this was humanity's final chance to avoid total destruction. If Earth surrendered now, most humans would be allowed to live as servants of the Zorvathi Empire. If Earth continued to resist, every human world would be burned to ash. Zalthun gave the humans 1 hour to respond, not because he expected them to surrender, but because he wanted them to spend that hour in fear. Commander Jake Harper received the message aboard Earth's orbital command station. He was surrounded by dozens of officers and technicians, all watching multiple screens showing the positions of friendly and enemy forces. Jake looked at the massive Zorvathi fleet on the display and felt a moment of doubt. 800 ships against fewer than 400. It seemed impossible. But then he remembered the volunteers who had flooded recruitment centers. He remembered the engineers working without sleep to build better weapons. He remembered President Morrison's words about humanity's refusal to give up. Jake opened a communication channel that would broadcast his response to the Zorvathi fleet, to Earth, and to every human colony. His message was short and simple. He said that throughout history, larger and stronger predators had tried to destroy humanity. All of them had failed. The Zorvathi would fail too. Then Jake spoke 3 words that would become famous in human history. He said, "Come and take it." The Zorvathi fleet began moving forward, accelerating toward the inner solar system. Their formation remained perfect, textbook military doctrine that had won them countless victories. High Commander Zalthun expected the humans to cluster their ships around Earth in a desperate last stand. Instead, his sensors showed that human military vessels were scattered throughout the solar system. Some were hiding in the asteroid belt. Others orbited Mars. Still more were positioned near the moons of Jupiter. It made no sense. The humans were dividing their already inferior forces. Zalthun dismissed it as the confusion of a primitive species that did not understand proper military strategy. He ordered his fleet to maintain course toward Mars at maximum speed. They would crush the human forces at Mars first, then move on to Earth. The third fleet passed Uranus without incident, then Saturn. Still no sign of human resistance. Some of the younger Zorvathi commanders began to feel uneasy. Where were the humans hiding? Why had they not attacked yet? The Zorvathi fleet entered the asteroid belt, maintaining their tight formation. That was when everything changed. Thousands of automated satellites that had been drifting silently through the rocks suddenly activated. Their targeting computers locked onto the nearest Zorvathi vessels and fired. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds, too fast for most ships to dodge. The Zorvathi shields held against most impacts, but not all. 3 escort vessels on the outer edge of the formation exploded as projectiles pierced their hulls and detonated their reactor cores. Before the Zorvathi could react, Commander Turner's hidden flotilla emerged from behind several large asteroids. 20 human ships appeared seemingly from nowhere, their weapons already firing. Quantum torpedoes streaked toward the Zorvathi formation, phasing in and out of normal space to bypass shields. 2 Zorvathi cruisers exploded in brilliant flashes. A third cruiser was crippled, spinning out of control as its engines failed. The ambush lasted only 4 minutes before Turner ordered his ships to retreat back into the asteroid field. The Zorvathi tried to pursue but found themselves surrounded by more automated defenses and floating mines. Every direction seemed to hide another threat. High Commander Zalthun roared in rage as damage reports came in. He had lost 9 ships, a tiny fraction of his fleet, but the Zorvathi Third Fleet arrived at Mars with fury burning in every commander's heart. They had lost 37 ships during their journey through the asteroid belt, casualties that came from ambushes and traps rather than honest battle. Prewe, Commander Zalthun stood on the bridge of Dark Conquest and stared at the red planet ahead. He would make the humans pay for every ship they had destroyed. He would turn Mars into an example that the entire galaxy would remember. Mars looked small and vulnerable, but it was covered with defensive installations. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like a metal ring, each one armed with enough weapons to threaten a battleship. On the surface, missile batteries were hidden in valleys and canyons, ready to launch the moment enemy ships came into range. Admiral Greg Foster commanded the human defense fleet from his flagship Valiant, a heavy cruiser that had seen action in a dozen minor conflicts over the past 20 years. Around him were 75 warships, everything that could be spared from Earth's own defenses. Greg knew the mathematics of the coming battle. 75 ships against more than 700. The Zorvathi outnumbered them 10-1, and their ships were more powerful on average. But Greg also knew that wars were not always won by the side with the most ships. Sometimes they were won by the side that was willing to sacrifice everything for victory. He opened a fleet-wide channel and spoke to every captain under his command. He told them that the galaxy was watching. If Mars fell quickly, the rest of the galaxy would believe humanity was weak. But if they could make the Zorvathi bleed, if they could show that humans did not surrender easily, then maybe other species would find the courage to resist as well. The battle began as the sun rose over the main colony dome on Mars. The Zorvathi dreadnoughts fired first, massive beams of concentrated energy that could melt through solid rock. The beams struck the orbital platforms, and for a moment it seemed like the human defenses would simply vaporize. But the shields held, glowing bright blue as they absorbed the incredible energy. Captain Nicole Price, commanding Platform 3, watched her shield strength indicators drop rapidly. She knew the platform could only take a few more hits before the shields failed completely. Nicole gave the order to return fire. All 12 platforms opened up at once, their railguns launching tungsten rods at speeds that approached a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles crossed the distance to the Zorvathi fleet in seconds. Several hit shields and were deflected, but others found their targets. A Zorvathi cruiser took a direct hit to its engine section and began tumbling out of formation. 2 escort vessels were holed through their main hulls and went silent. Admiral Foster launched his attack craft, 40 small ships equipped with the quantum shields that Dr. Hayes had developed. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez led her squadron in a wild charge directly toward the nearest Zorvathi dreadnought. Energy. Beams from dozens of enemy ships converged on her squadron, but the quantum shields absorbed the impacts. Amy's ship shook from the force, but the shields held. She could see her shield strength dropping rapidly, but she only needed them to last a few more seconds. Amy's squadron reached point-blank range with the dreadnought, so close that they were flying between its weapon towers. At this range, the dreadnought's main guns could not track them, and its smaller weapons were not powerful enough to penetrate the quantum shields. Amy locked her targeting computer onto the dreadnought's exposed reactor section and fired every torpedo her ship carried. The other 11 ships in her squadron did the same, launching a total of 72 quantum torpedoes into the massive vessel's vulnerable core. The dreadnought exploded from the inside out, its reactor unable to contain the catastrophic chain reaction. The explosion was so powerful that it created a brief flash of light bright enough to be seen from the Martian surface. 3 nearby Zorvathi cruisers were caught in the shockwave and suffered heavy damage. It was the first time in recorded history that a Zorvathi dreadnought had been destroyed in combat. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The shockwave also damaged 5 of Amy's 12 ships. 2 were completely destroyed, vaporized by the expanding ball of plasma. Amy's own ship lost power to its engines and began drifting, helpless. She and her surviving crew members evacuated in escape pods just before a Zorvathi frigate destroyed the crippled vessel with a missile strike. The battle continued for 6 brutal hours. One by one, the orbital platforms fell. Platform 7 took too many hits and its reactor went critical, exploding in a fireball that lit up Mars' orbit. Platform 11 was swarmed by Zorvathi fighters and lost all its weapons before it could be evacuated. Admiral Foster's fleet fought with desperate courage, but the numbers were simply too great. Human ships were destroyed faster than they could take down enemy vessels. Then Commander Jake Harper sprang the trap he had been preparing. Hidden among the 2 moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, a second human fleet had been waiting in complete silence. These 50 heavy cruisers and 2 carriers had powered down all their systems to avoid detection. Now they activated everything at once, their reactors surging to full power as they accelerated toward the Zorvathi fleet from behind. Captain Derek Shaw commanded this hidden force from the carrier Defiant. His ship launched wave after wave of bombercraft, each one loaded with the most powerful conventional explosives humanity had ever created. The bombers flew through the chaos of battle, targeting Zorvathi ships that were already damaged or distracted by other threats. Meanwhile, Shaw's heavy cruisers opened fire with their railguns, catching the Zorvathi fleet in a crossfire between 2 human forces. High Commander Zal Thun realized too late that he had been outmaneuvered. His fleet was caught between Admiral Foster's surviving ships in front and Captain Shaw's fresh forces behind. The perfect Zorvathi formation began to break apart as individual captains tried to respond to threats from multiple directions. Some ships turned to face the new enemy, creating gaps in their defensive sphere. Other ships tried to maintain formation discipline, leaving their rear sections vulnerable to attack. The battle became a chaotic melee, exactly the kind of fighting where humanity's more flexible command structure gave them an advantage. Human captains did not need to wait for orders from a central authority. They saw opportunities and took them immediately. A damaged Zorvathi cruiser would find itself swarmed by 3 human frigates working together. A dreadnought that turned To engage one threat would be hit from behind by ships it had forgotten about. Dr. Vincent Hayes watched the battle from his underground facility on Mars. His screen showed telemetry from every human ship still fighting. He saw the quantum shields performing exactly as designed, allowing smaller ships to survive hits that would normally destroy them instantly. But he also saw the limitations. Several ships had burned out their reactors trying to maintain the shields for too long. Others had been destroyed by kinetic weapons that the shields could not stop. The technology was good, but it was not perfect. After 8 hours of continuous combat, High Commander Salthun made a decision he had never made before in his long military career. He ordered a retreat. The Zorvati fleet began pulling back toward Jupiter, fighting a defensive battle as they withdrew. They had lost 217 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. The Third Fleet, which had conquered dozens of worlds, had been forced to run from a battle by a supposedly primitive species. The human losses were equally severe. Admiral Foster's fleet had been reduced from 75 ships to 22. All 12 orbital platforms were destroyed or disabled. More than 15,000 human military personnel had died in the battle. But Mars still stood. The colony domes were intact. The people had survived. Captain Nicole Price floated in an escape pod with 5 other survivors from Platform 3. Through the small window, she watched the Zorvathi fleet retreating. It was hard to feel victorious when surrounded by so much death and destruction. But she understood what they had accomplished. They had proven that the Zorvathi could be beaten. They had shown the galaxy that humanity would not surrender without making their enemies pay a terrible price. Admiral Foster's flagship Valiant was heavily damaged, but still functional. He opened a communication channel to every surviving ship and to Mars Command. His voice was tired but firm when he spoke. He said that they had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Zorvathi would return with reinforcements, and next time, they would be even more determined to crush humanity. Every ship captain, every surviving crew member, needed to use this victory to prepare for the next battle. President Morrison broadcast a message from Earth to all human colonies. She acknowledged the losses at Mars and promised that every fallen soldier would be remembered as a hero. But she also pointed out what they had achieved. For the first time in Zorvathi history, one of their fleets had been forced to retreat. Other species across the galaxy were already hearing the news, and some were starting to wonder if the Zorvathi Empire was truly as invincible as everyone believed. Commander Jake Harper stood on the bridge of his command ship and studied the tactical reports from the Battle of Mars. The Zorvathi had lost more ships than humans, but they could afford those losses. The Third Fleet alone was larger than. High Commander Zalthun paced the bridge of Dark Conquest like a caged predator, his rage so intense that his crew members stayed as far from him as possible. The retreat from Mars had humiliated him in front of the entire Zorvathi Empire. Other commanders were already questioning his leadership. Some were even suggesting that he should be replaced. Zalthun refused to accept this disgrace. He would return to Earth with such overwhelming force that the humans would have no choice but to die. Zalthun sent a message to the Zorvathi High Command, requesting immediate reinforcements. Within days, he received confirmation that the 4th and 5th fleets were being redirected to join him at Jupiter. Together, the 3 fleets would field over 2,000 warships, enough to crush any resistance humanity could offer. But Zalthun wanted more than just victory. He wanted total destruction. He requested permission to bring the Worldbreaker, and after some debate, the High Command agreed. The Worldbreaker was not a ship in the traditional sense. It was a mobile battle station the size of a small moon, built over 50 years by the greatest Zorvathi engineers. At its core was a gravity manipulation device that could focus tectonic forces on a planet's crust, literally tearing the world apart from within. The Worldbreaker had been used only twice before, both times to destroy planets whose populations refused to surrender. Now it would be used on Earth. Commander Jake Harper sat in a secure conference room deep beneath Earth's surface, surrounded by holographic displays showing tactical data. General Marcus Cole was there, along with Admiral Foster, who had returned from Mars, Captain Shaw, and several other senior officers. Also present was Dr. Vincent Hayes, who looked like he had not slept in days. They all knew what was coming. Intelligence reports confirmed that 3 Zorvathi fleets were gathering at Jupiter, and satellite images showed the massive worldbreaker arriving to join them. Dr. Hayes stood and activated a holographic projection, showing the internal structure of a Zorvathi warship. He explained that his team had been studying wreckage recovered from destroyed enemy vessels. The Zorvathi used a power system based on zero-point energy extraction, incredibly efficient and powerful. But Hayes had discovered something interesting. All the ships in a Zorvathi fleet were connected through a quantum field that allowed them to share power with each other. If one ship needed extra energy for shields or weapons, it could draw power from nearby vessels. This interconnected system made the Zorvathi formation stronger, but it also created a vulnerability. If someone could generate a powerful enough quantum disruption pulse, it might cause a cascade failure across the entire fleet. Every ship connected to the quantum field would suffer simultaneous reactor overloads. The problem was generating a pulse of sufficient magnitude. It would require more power than any ship could produce, more power than any weapon humanity had ever built. Hayes explained that there was only one way to generate enough energy. Every fusion reactor on Earth would need to overload at the exact same moment, channeling all their output through a specially designed transmitter. The pulse would last only a fraction of a second, but it would be powerful enough to disrupt the Zorvathi quantum field across the entire solar system. The cost would be catastrophic. Earth's entire power grid would be destroyed. Cities would go dark. Life support systems would fail. It would take decades to rebuild what would be lost in that single moment. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what Hayes was saying. General Cole asked if there was any other option, any other way to generate the required power. Hayes shook his head slowly. This was the only chance humanity had to stop the Worldbreaker and 3 Zorvathi fleets. Without this weapon, Earth would fall. The only question was whether humanity was willing to pay the price. President Morrison joined the meeting remotely from her secure location. She had been listening to the entire discussion. Her face on the holographic display showed the weight of the decision she had to make. If she authorized this operation, millions of people would suffer when the power grid failed. Emergency systems would keep most people alive, but there would be deaths, especially among those dependent on medical equipment. The economic damage would be enormous. But if she did not authorize it, everyone on Earth would die or become slaves. Morrison took a deep breath and made her decision. She authorized the operation, codenamed Broken Arrow. Dr. Hayes and his team would have 10 days to build the quantum disruption transmitter and connect it to Earth's reactor network. Meanwhile, every available warship would be recalled to defend Earth. They would need to hold the Zorvathi forces back long enough for the weapon to be ready. Commander, Alex Turner brought his surviving ships back from the asteroid belt. Captain Nicole Price and the few surviving crew members from the orbital platforms were reassigned to new vessels. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had survived the Battle of Mars in an escape pod, was given command of a new attack squadron equipped with improved quantum shields. Every engineer, every technician, every person with military training was mobilized for the final defense of Earth. Katie Sullivan worked day and night at the Luna shipyards, pushing her teams beyond any reasonable limit. They were repairing damaged vessels and salvaging weapons from ships too damaged to fly. Every working railgun, every functional missile launcher, every operational shield generator was being installed on ships that could still fight. Katie knew that many of these hastily repaired vessels would not survive the coming battle, but every ship that could fire even one shot might make the difference. On Earth's surface, massive construction crews worked to install the quantum disruption transmitter. The device was built in sections across 12 different locations, each one connected by underground power conduits to the nearest fusion reactor. Dr. Hayes personally supervised every connection, every calibration. There could be no mistakes. If even one reactor failed to overload at the correct moment, the pulse would not be strong enough to affect the Zorvathi fleet. The 10 days passed too quickly. Long-range sensors detected the combined Zorvathi armada leaving Jupiter and heading toward Earth. Over 2,000 warships arranged in the perfect formation that had brought them victory after victory. And at the center, the Worldbreaker, so massive that its gravity well affected nearby asteroids, pulling them into decaying orbits around the station. High Commander Zalthun broadcast a final message to Earth. His words were cold and final. He said that humanity had been given chances to surrender, and they had refused every time. Now there would be no more chances. The world breaker would be used. Earth would be destroyed completely, turned into an asteroid field as a warning to other species who might consider defying the Zorvathi Empire. He gave humanity 1 hour to evacuate as many people as possible to space stations and colony ships, not out of mercy, but because he wanted survivors to spread the story of Earth's destruction. Commander Jake Harper listened to the message and felt a cold determination settle over him. He opened a communication channel that would broadcast to the Zorvathi fleet, to every human ship, and to every person on Earth. He spoke about humanity's journey from caves to the stars, about how humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. He explained that humanity had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day, facing predators and diseases and natural disasters. Every challenge had made them stronger. Every threat had taught them something new. Jake said that the Zorvathi had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that technological superiority meant guaranteed victory. They had forgotten that sometimes the weaker opponent wins because they are more desperate, more creative, more willing to sacrifice everything for survival. He told Zalthun that humanity had one more lesson to teach the Zorvathi Empire, and it would be a lesson they would never forget. The Zorvathi fleet continued its advance, and the human defensive fleet moved to intercept 400 human warships against 2,000 alien vessels. The Battle of Earth was about to begin, and everyone on both sides knew it would determine the fate of humanity forever. Admiral Foster commanded the center formation. Captain Shaw took the left wing. Commander Turner led the right wing. They formed a defensive line between the Zorvathi Armada and their home planet. The distance between the fleets shrank rapidly. Weapon systems on both sides charged to full power. Thousands of soldiers and crew members said silent prayers or made peace with their mortality. High Commander Zalthun gave the order to open fire, and the space between Earth and the attacking fleet filled with energy beams and missiles. The final battle had begun. The space around Earth erupted into chaos as thousands of weapons fired simultaneously. Energy beams crossed the darkness in brilliant colors, while missiles left trails of light as they sought their targets. The human defensive fleet fought with a fury born of desperation, knowing that every second they survived was another second for Dr. Hayes to prepare the quantum disruption weapon. Admiral Foster's flagship took hit after hit, its shields flickering and failing, but the old commander refused to retreat. He ordered his weapons to keep firing even as hull breaches opened across multiple decks. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez led her attack squadron in a suicidal charge toward the world breaker itself. The massive station was so large that flying toward it felt like approaching a small planet. Its defensive weapons created a wall of fire that no ship should have been able to penetrate, but Amy's squadron had the best quantum shields that humanity could build. The shields glowed brilliant blue as they absorbed impact after impact. 3 of her 12 ships were destroyed anyway, their shields overloading and failing, but the rest pressed on. Amy's targeting computer locked onto what her briefing had identified as a critical sensor array on the world breaker's surface. She knew that destroying it would not stop the station, but it might buy a few more minutes. She launched every torpedo she had and watched them streak toward the target. The explosions that followed were tiny compared to the world breaker's massive size, but they achieved their goal. The station's targeting systems flickered briefly, giving other human ships a chance to slip past its defenses. Commander Alex Turner was flying a patched-together cruiser that had been damaged at Mars and barely repaired in time for this battle. His ship was slow and its weapons were half-functional, but Turner pushed it forward anyway. He targeted a Zorvathi dreadnought that was hammering Admiral Foster's position. Turner's railgun fired 3 times before overheating, and all 3 shots found their mark. The dreadnought's shields held, but the impacts forced it to divert power from weapons to defensive systems, giving Foster's ships a brief respite. Then Turner's luck ran out. A Zorvathi missile penetrated his failing shields and tore through the engine section. Alarm screamed as the reactor began an uncontrolled cascade. Turner had maybe 30 seconds before the ship exploded. He could order his crew to evacuate, but there was not enough time for everyone to reach the escape pods. Instead, Turner made a different choice. He locked his navigation computer onto the Zorvathi dreadnought's bridge section and pushed his engines to maximum power. using the reactor's imminent overload to give him one final burst of speed. Turner's cruiser slammed into the dreadnought like a bullet, and the resulting explosion destroyed both vessels. The dreadnought's command crew died instantly, and without leadership, the massive ship began drifting out of formation. Two nearby Zorvathi cruisers collided with the dead dreadnought, creating even more chaos in the alien formation. Captain Derek Shaw watched Turner's sacrifice from the bridge of his carrier and felt tears in his eyes. But there was no time to mourn. His carrier was surrounded by enemy fighters, and his own bomber squadrons were taking heavy casualties. Shaw ordered his ship to ram through the Zorvathi fighter screen, using the carrier's bulk to clear a path. The maneuver worked, but it left his ship vulnerable. A Zorvathi heavy cruiser locked weapons onto the carrier and fired a full broadside. Captain Nicole Price saw Shaw's carrier taking critical damage and made a split-second decision. She pushed her ship between the carrier and the attacking cruiser, using her vessel as a shield. The Zorvathi fire meant for Shaw's carrier hit Price's ship instead, punching through the hull and causing catastrophic damage. Price managed to evacuate most of her crew before her ship broke apart, but she stayed at her post until the very end, keeping her weapons firing to give others a chance to escape. On Earth's surface, Dr. Vincent Hayes watched the battle through satellite feeds while making final adjustments to the quantum disruption transmitter. His hands shook from exhaustion and stress, but he forced himself to focus. Every connection had to be perfect. Every reactor had to be synchronized exactly. He was asking Earth's entire power infrastructure to commit suicide all at once. And if anything went wrong, the weapon would fail and Earth would lose its power grid for nothing. Admiral Foster's flagship finally took too much damage to continue fighting. The bridge was exposed to vacuum, and fires burned through multiple decks. Foster gave the order to abandon ship, but he stayed behind with a skeleton crew to keep the weapons operational for a few more minutes. His final transmission was broadcast across the entire human fleet. He said that he was proud to have served with the finest warriors humanity had ever produced, and that whatever happened next, the galaxy would remember that humans did not surrender. The Valiant exploded in a brilliant flash and Foster died still fighting. Across the battlefield, hundreds of other human ships were meeting similar fates. The Zorvathi had lost ships too, nearly 300 so far, but they still had overwhelming numbers. High Commander Zalthun watched the human resistance crumbling and felt satisfaction. Soon the Worldbreaker would be in position to fire, and Earth would cease to exist. Commander Jake Harper received a signal from Dr. Hayes. The quantum disruption weapon was ready. All fusion reactors across Earth were connected and synchronized. Hayes needed only a single word to activate the system. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the Zorvathi fleet closing in on Earth, the Worldbreaker powering up its planet-killing weapon. Less than 90 human ships remained operational from the original 400. They had done everything they could. Now it was time to play their final card. Jake gave the authorization code, and Dr. Hayes activated the quantum disruption transmitter. Across Earth, every fusion reactor overloaded at precisely the same microsecond. The amount of energy released was beyond anything humanity had ever generated before. All that power channeled through the transmitter and burst outward in a pulse of quantum disruption that spread across the solar system at the speed of light. The effect on the Zorvathi fleet was immediate and catastrophic. The quantum field that connected their ships and allowed them to share power suddenly became a conduit for destruction. The disruption pulse cascaded from ship to ship like a virus spreading through a network. Reactors that had been perfectly stable moments before began uncontrolled chain reactions. Smaller Zorvathi vessels simply exploded. Larger ships lost all power, their systems completely fried, drifting helplessly in space. The Worldbreaker, with its massive power requirements and extensive quantum field connections, suffered the worst fate. Its gravity manipulation device destabilized, and the very weapon meant to destroy Earth turned on itself. The station collapsed inward, crushed by its own gravity manipulation system running out of control. The implosion created a brief but intense gravity well that pulled in nearby Zorvathi ships before the entire station exploded with the force of multiple fusion bombs. High Commander Zalthun sat in his command chair aboard Dark Conquest, watching in horror as his entire armada died around him. Emergency systems had activated automatically, but main power was gone. Life support was failing. His flagship, which moments ago had been the pride of the Zorvathi fleet, was now a drifting tomb. Around him, the same fate had befallen every ship in the three fleets. Over 2,000 warships reduced to dead hulls in less than a minute. On Earth, the lights went out. Every city plunged into darkness as the power grid collapsed completely. Emergency generators kicked in at hospitals and critical facilities, but billions of people suddenly found themselves without electricity. President Morrison had prepared the population for this moment, explaining what would happen when the weapon fired, but experiencing it was still terrifying. For several hours, Earth's surface was darker than it had been in centuries, but as dawn broke over different parts of the planet, people emerged from their homes and shelters and looked up at the sky. They could see the debris field in orbit where the Zorvathi fleet had died. They could see the few surviving human ships limping back toward Earth, and they understood that somehow, impossibly, they had won. Commander Jake Harper floated in the command station, now running on backup power. He watched as salvage crews began checking the disabled Zorvathi vessels. Most were completely dead, their crews either killed by the reactor overloads or suffocating as life support failed. A few ships at the extreme edges of the formation had survived with minimal damage and were attempting to retreat. Harper let them go. They would carry the story of Earth's victory back to the Zorvathi Empire. 3 months later, Jake stood once again before the Galactic Council, but everything had changed. The council members who had once looked at humans with contempt now showed something very different in their eyes. Fear and respect mixed together. The Zorvathi Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was in chaos. They had lost 3 entire fleets and their most powerful weapon. Subject species were rebelling. The Empire was collapsing. Jake proposed a new alliance, one where species helped defend each other against aggression rather than bowing to stronger powers. Several species immediately agreed to join. The Novari, who had been enslaved by the Zorvathi for 2 generations,